Okay, MegaWhale team, welcome back to the channel and thank you for tuning in. Over the past 24 hours, we have seen a fair amount of absorption in the selling pressure on the short term, resulting in Bitcoin showing a significant amount of strength just under the $95,000 resistance. In today's video, we are going to be discussing the next short-term expectations, where Bitcoin is likely heading towards, the breakout of the S&P 500, the weekly and high time frame charts for Bitcoin, and of course the total cryptocurrency and total altcoin market cap. Before we get into the crux of today's video, make sure to go ahead and smash that like button, hit that subscribe button, and of course comment down below if you have anything to say. If you are interested in more of this kind of content, you can also join us on Telegram. We post daily videos for Bitcoin focusing on the facts, the data, the technical, and the structural information. No hype, no BS, no emotion, pure raw TA. The Telegram link is the first link in the description down below. You'll get access to videos, charts, updates, analysis, educational posts, news events, and everything you need to stay in the loop for cryptocurrency with Bitcoin and the relevant economic news. And if you're interested in taking your trading to the next level, you can join us in the VIP channel. You can click the pinned comment to find out our membership information. We have on a sale at the moment lasting until the 2nd of May. You can find out our membership details by clicking that first link, or check out a 50+ month trading track record by clicking the second one. You'll get access to two main channels: the main VIP channel where trading setups with exact entries, targets, and stop losses are posted, and our group chats, from the general chat to the trading chart and education chat to the news, the daily video, the help, and the community setup chat. Check it out, we'll see you in there, and let's dive on in. So over the last 24 hours, we can see Bitcoin corrected to the downside, retesting that $93,000 level, establishing yet again another lower high. Now, with this lower high being established, we can also see on the 4-hour, we had downtrending on the RSI, so lower lows on the RSI with higher lows on the price action, signifying a degree of absorption occurring here, which propelled Bitcoin back up to retest, or nearly retest, this upper level of liquidity at that week high. So we are underneath currently this $95,000 cluster of resistance, which is going to be acting as the trigger point of which we need to break through to see this continuation toward the upside. And with that lower high retest over here, or establishment, we have developed a new diagonal uptrend, which we will need to sustain above if we do want to see Bitcoin continue upwards. But it has also acted as a new trigger where, if broken, we will likely see a correction. So we have had some short-term developments here, which we'll be discussing in much more detail in today's video. But moving over to the market data of 24-hour volume and liquidations, volume is up a pretty significant amount over here, up 61% at 246 billion. Liquidations at around 280 million here, up 89%, with the majority of those liquidations still coming from long positions, as Bitcoin did drop a pretty significant amount over the last 24 hours. The altcoin market as well dropping a pretty significant amount. But then we did see that rally in the last 12 or so hours back toward the upside. So a bit of a flush of these long positions and then pushing back up to flush late shorts. Taking a look at the S&P 500. The S&P 500 has broken out currently on the daily chart a major weekly downtrend. Now, this is some very big news here, guys. The weekly downtrend spanning back since the beginning of Feb 2025, you can see, being that of the initial high and prior all-time high of the S&P. We have got numerous retests of this trend line. Of course, we also had the breakout of that downtrend on the RSI about a week ago over here, and we can see this was acting as a leading sign for the price to break through. So we have seen a breakout over here. It'd be perfect that we are able to sustain now up this region, and if we do, we are expecting the price to potentially rise to 5,700, potentially 5,800. Looking at the overall uptrend, we do have a diagonal uptrend spanning from these lows, which we can see crosses through that level of support of 5,300. But from a daily perspective, The key horizontal level we are watching to sustain above is going to be this region between the prior breakout structure and the change of character. So this is sitting at around $5,500. Provided we can sustain above $5,500, this breakout will also likely sustain, and therefore we would expect continuations upwards. So that is going to be the expectation at the moment. However, if we drop below the 5,500 level, this horizontal level of support, that is going to be marked as a failure or a failed attempt to continue, or deviation, and we will likely see a correction back to 5,300. So at the moment, it is looking good, a fantastic break, but we need to see this sustain now. We need to see the price close a few daily candles above. We need to see 5,500 continue to remain as support. Let's move over to the DXY. The DXY has, of course, retested yet again that horizontal low of the macro consolidation, of course, dropping back down to 99 from that 100 point. Yet again, we are expecting macro directional continuations towards 93 over the course of the next 6 to 12 months, particularly if we see interest rates reduce. Now, the next interest rate decision is coming up pretty soon. That is going to be in 8 days' time, and the probabilities are still massively in favor of an interest rate pause. So we are going to be paying very close attention to the Federal Reserve press conference following the interest rate decision to find out any decisions or changes in the current narrative in regards to future interest rate cuts. That is it for the broader market updates, guys. That is it for the S&P 500. Let's go ahead and jump into Bitcoin. Now, before we get into the Bitcoin analysis, make sure to go ahead and sign up to BitGet, BitUnix, or BingX. These are the exchange links down below. You'll get a lifetime trading fee discount of 15%, which can build up to 45%. You'll go to support yourself trading on exchanges I trust. Of course, you've got access to that lucrative bonus, and you'll support me making the content. Check it out. We'll play an ad, and we'll see you back in just a second. If you are looking for a new exchange or just want to support the channel, sign up to BitUnix with the link down below. You'll get a lifetime trading fee discount of 15%, which can build up to 45% based on your trading volume, as well as access to a bonus reward center, and of course, all of the exclusive campaigns we run on this exchange. You'll also get access to BitUnix being a non-KYC exchange, meaning you can sign up from anywhere in the globe without regulations. And most importantly, I only promote exchanges I trust and I use. As you can see, I trade on BitUnix very regularly, being the highest VIP level with over $500 million in trading volume for the last 30 days. And lastly, if you were interested in signing up to our other two exchanges, BingX or BitGet, you can also do that via the links down below. You as well will get the 15% trading fee discount and everything else that comes with it. Go ahead and sign up. Thank you for supporting. Let's jump back in. Okay, legends, let's go ahead and jump back into the video. So we can see Bitcoin broke out of $89,000 last week, resulting in a fantastic rally toward the upside, retesting two critical levels. The first one being that weekly high right over here, or should I say its weekly low right over here at 93.7. We closed our weekly candle just underneath that region yesterday, but since then we have had a pretty solid daily candle now pushing up to 95,000. So we've had that weekly close, we have broke through 89,000, and we are currently sitting just above this prior weekly low. All in all, it is looking pretty solid. Now with that, the short-term price action having broke 89,000 reached its other target, and that was going to be the $95,000 buy-side liquidity, marking that off, telling us that the move upward from the break of 89k, the expected target as a consequence of 89k breaking, was reached and has been completed. So as we said in yesterday's video, this means we need to see one of two things. We need to see consolidation and an absorption of selling pressure, facilitating a new structural formation developing, which will then facilitate the price to continue upwards and clear through this weekly low. Or we're going to see the complete opposite, which is again exhaustion of the buying pressure, buyers stepping back in, prior lower highs being taken out, and the price action correcting. But either way, the target from 89k has been reached, and therefore we can no longer use the justification of the 89k break being that of which the main driver of the price moving upwards. So now what are we in? We are in a period of indecision, we are in a period of consolidation, and we are in a period where the next move is going to determine whether or not we likely sustain above this weekly low, or we fail to do so. So let's talk about the short term now. So that brings us to today. What we can see here, particularly over the last 24 hours, is we saw the price action drop toward the downside as a consequence of, again, some of his prior levels of liquidity being taken out and rejecting from that 95 to 93.7 weekly high. We saw the price action push as low as 92.8, where we then bounced toward the upside, establishing yet again a new lower high. If you watched yesterday's video, you would know the trigger for a correction back to 89,000 was going to be the loss of 92,000, essentially the loss of this sell side liquidity. That is now no longer the case. The trigger point for a correction down to 89,000 is going to be initially 92.9 to 93,000, the new lower high. So all we really need to see to get a shift in the probabilities toward the downside is a structural shift or a trend-based shift, meaning the pattern of lower highs needs to be broken. And if we see that, that is going to be the trigger that we will expect a correction toward the downside. So for us to expect the price to go lower, that is what we are going to be watching for. We are watching for a break of the prior lower high that would subsequently result in a break of the uptrend that has been developed, and that will push Bitcoin into this lower historical resistance range. We can see here on the VRPV, we have a pretty big gap over here. This range here is a low historical resistance range, meaning the volume requirements for Bitcoin to move from 92,000 to 89,000 is significantly lower than that of periods such as here, where we've got all this historical trading volume. So that means, again, we will generally see a surge in volatility as we enter these ranges, and if we see that from the top side down, that is going to be bearish volatility, which will likely result in a volatile move downward. So we have that potential here. We have this gap here in the VRPV, which could facilitate a volatile correction back to 89, but for that to develop, for us to actually see that happen, we need to eradicate this absorption that is occurring here of the selling pressure. Again, on the 4-hour chart, we showed you the downtrend or the lower lows over here, the lower lows on the RSI, and then we have the higher lows here on the price action. That is an indication that although we have selling pressure developing from that resistance here at 95K and that weekly resistance, the buyers are stepping in earlier, okay, than what we saw before, and more aggressively than what we saw before, indicating that although we have increasing and developing selling pressure, there is adequate buying going on to absorb that selling pressure at a higher price. That is what absorption is, and that is actually quite bullish. So until we see that absorption eradicate, the expectation is that Bitcoin will remain above this diagonal uptrend. We will continue to establish these higher lows, and we will likely eventually break that next level of resistance. So this leads us to the bullish case scenario now. As we mentioned already, we'll come back to the weekly in a second. We are sitting above the weekly low. That is sitting at 93.7K. If we look at the short-term price action, 93.7K is actually sitting closer to its POC level now, which will coincide with that uptrend. So essentially what we can see here, while we remain above the uptrend, it is likely we will remain above 93.7K, and we need to see a weekly close above 93.7K to actually confirm the break. Now, if we're taking a look at 95,000, this is going to be the upper level of short-term resistance we have established. We can see now 2 rejections from this region. For Bitcoin to continue toward the upside, we need to clear this level. If we are able to break through this level, prior to a loss of this diagonal uptrend, it is likely we are going to see continuations, potentially as high as 100,000, but very likely to 98,000. The reason we have those two targets, first and foremost, if we zoom out to a 4-hourly chart, we can see 98,000 to 100,000 gives us this range here on the short term up into that sell side liquidity, up into this sell side liquidity here, and of course, just above this point of liquidity on the 4-hour chart. If we move into the daily chart here, you can see the VRPV cluster starts to really taper off after this chunk at around 98,000. So we know we have a major point of resistance sitting between 98 to 100,000 as depicted by the VRPV here on the daily, and of course on the weekly, and of course by the short-term price action here on the 4-hour. So that is going to be our target if we break through the upside $98 to $100,000 if we break upwards. If we're looking at this from a structural perspective, It does appear like we are developing some sort of uptrending triangle structure, so ascending triangle structure. Apply that to the breakout point. You can see already that takes us pretty much to 100,000, but it definitely takes us above 98,000 for a measured move. So at the moment, the price action is in a consolidation. The probabilities are more or less equal at the moment. There is no massive statistical advantage in either direction. We are in consolidation. We are in indecision. If we look at the S&P 500 breakout, fantastic, that's good to see. Bitcoin breaking through the weekly, fantastic, good to see. But what happens at this resistance and this support is going to determine where we likely close that weekly candle, and thus that is going to impact where the price action likely moves to on the higher time frame. Let's talk about this one more time. If we see the break toward the upside, it is very likely we close the weekly candle above 93.7, once again turning this into a level of support. We can see this level acted as support for around 3 months, so we know that it will be a very strong support if we are able to break back and sustain above here for the weekly close. If we take a look at the downward move, if we do drop below this region, break this uptrend and move toward the downside to 89,000, this won't necessarily be bearish on the higher time frame. Yes, it will be bearish on the short term, but just because we see a red candle, it doesn't mean the red candle is bearish. Just because we see a green candle, it doesn't mean the green candle is bullish. The context matters. So zooming back to the weekly, in terms of where Bitcoin could drop to and remain bullish, an 89K retest would not mean the trend has broken. We can see an 89K retest here will still enable the price to sustain above the weekly high at 86,000, and of course the low of that candle, indicating a simple support retest, and of course a lower high development before a potential continuation. I would be concerned for Bitcoin if Bitcoin fails to hold 89,000. If we lost 89,000, that is when we run the risk for steeper corrections, potentially into the Gaussian channel upper band and the 50 EMA, because these are going to be trending upwards almost indefinitely until the price drops below them, meaning the trigger point for a macro downtrend is going to get closer and closer to the price unless we see a massive surge in volatility, which takes the price further away from these levels. What does that mean? It means that if we were to drop into 86, we will no longer need to see a drop to 78,000 for us to confirm we are going to go lower. We might only need to see a drop to 82,000 or maybe 83,000. So the trigger point for the bearish weekly close under the Gaussian channel upper band and the 50 EMA is ever increasing in value. This is something to be considerate of and something to be cautious of if we do start to see the price action drop below 89,000. But of course, that is a long way away and we have to trade level by level. So I wouldn't concern too much of that right now. It is more or less just generally being aware. So I've talked about, let's just summarize. We've talked about the short-term price action. We've talked about what has happened over the last 24 hours of the absorption. We've talked about what needs to happen for Bitcoin to go upwards and the potential targets being 98K and 100,000. And then we've contextualized that move to the weekly chart, explaining the significance of that and the impact that will have on the weekly. We've also done that for the short-term downward move. We talked about what needs to happen for the price to go down, why the price action could potentially drop lower if these lower highs on the short term are broken and this uptrend is lost. We've talked about the context of that downward move being genuinely bullish, considered we sustain above 89,000, and we also talked about the consequence of a loss of 89,000 for worst case scenario. So we have covered absolutely everything you need to know about this short term and absolutely everything you need to know about the consequences of these short term moves on the higher time frame. So let's now finish up by discussing the total market cap and very briefly the total altcoin market, and then we'll wrap up the video. So taking a look at the total market cap first and foremost, we can see over here on the total market cap, we have got some key levels of resistance we are coming up on, but the most important level we are watching is not the levels of resistance. We are not so much watching levels of rejection. We are watching levels of support, because if these levels of support are lost, that is going to be an indication of a steeper correction that may resume. So since we are in an uptrend, we are watching this level right over here. We are watching the 282 to 283 trillion dollar level. This is going to be the prior level of resistance. Okay, sitting at 282 to 283 trillion. We can see right over here, we have broken and we have sustained above this region now for around about a week. If we come back down to retest it, that is not of any concern. That could very, very well happen. That will still be bullish. If we drop below this region, that is when I'm going to be very concerned for steeper market-wide corrections to 2.6 trillion for the total market cap. And if we lose 2.6 trillion, potentially into 2.3 trillion. And that is going to be the serious correction we see if we start to see the price go down. So all in all, sit above 2.82, 2.83, we are expecting bullish, but if we drop below that level, I'd be very concerned for steeper corrections for Bitcoin and altcoin alike. If we look at the altcoin market, now the altcoin market is not looking as good as the rest of the market because we are still sitting underneath a pretty important level of resistance. And that is going to be this level here at around 840 billion to 850 billion. Essentially, it is going to be this lower high. Now, the reason why this is important is because currently we are at the risk of establishing a failed break, essentially another lower high. Now, if we establish another lower high over here, that is going to be an indication that although the downtrend in strength has weakened because the trajectory of the trend in terms of the angle of the trend is just a representation of the velocity and the volatility of the trend, which is just an indication of strength, okay? But if we do establish a lower high, it will still indicate that we are in a downtrend, but the downtrend has weakened for a time being, okay? Which means we could very well see a continuation lower. But if we break through this region, that would be a structural breakout, and we would expect a very strong move up for the altcoin market, potentially 960 to 920 billion, which is at least a 15